23,000 crore rupees. That is how much foreign money flows into Indian NGOs every year. Not through investment, not through trade, but as direct funding sent as donations, grants, and contributions from foreign countries to organizations operating inside India. And between 30% and 40% of that money, roughly 7,000 crore rupees to 9,000 crore rupees, or about $727 million to $935 million annually, comes from a single country, the United States of America. India regulates foreign funding to NGOs through the Foreign Contribution Regulation Act, or FCRA. The law was introduced in 1976, rewritten in 2010, and tightened again in 2020, with new rules issued in June 2026. And suddenly, United States began treating the issue as a matter of national security. The official American position is that India's new FCRA law threatens religious freedom, restricts civil society, and could be used to seize the assets of churches, charities, and hospitals. America has been spending thousands of crore rupees every year to fund organizations that operate inside India. India just decided it wants to know exactly where that money goes, what it is used for, and who is personally responsible for it. And America does not want India to know. These are reasonable questions for any sovereign country to ask. Yet the moment India demanded greater transparency and accountability, Washington began treating the issue as a national security concern. That reaction raises an uncomfortable question. If the funding was entirely harmless, why should America be troubled by India examining it? Why does greater transparency appear to make Washington so uneasy? Why now? Because India just introduced the strongest version of this law it has ever proposed, a complete overhaul. A designated authority with the power to seize assets. Mandatory reporting down to the state level. This is a fundamental shift in how India controls foreign money on its own soil. Three things explain why America is so concerned. First, the designated authority. The new provision allows a designated authority to investigate violations and, in certain cases, seize or attach assets. This is the part that has caused the strongest reaction among some American Christian organizations and their lobby groups. Second, America already has a stricter law of its own. The United States uses the Foreign Agents Registration Act, or FARA, to monitor people and organizations working on behalf of foreign interests. In many ways, FARA is stricter than what India has proposed. Yet American politicians are criticizing India for demanding similar transparency. Third, thousands of NGOs had already lost their licenses. Even before the latest amendment was passed, 21,933 NGOs had already lost their FCRA licenses for failing to meet legal requirements. This video examines all these points, and by the end, the situation looks very different from the version being presented by American politicians. Here's the money India decided to watch. India is not a country that receives foreign aid in the way that word is normally understood. India is the world's fourth largest economy. It does not need the United States to fund its hospitals or its schools. And yet every year, thousands of crore rupees arrive from foreign countries into Indian organizations that are not the Indian government, not Indian corporations, and not private Indian individuals making investments. These are NGOs, trusts, associations, religious bodies, educational institutions, advocacy groups. Some of them do genuinely valuable work. India recognizes this. The law has never banned foreign funding for NGOs, and the proposed amendment does not ban it either. The question has always been, which organizations are receiving how much, from where, and for what purpose? The Foreign Contribution Regulation Act, FCRA, was first enacted in 1976 during the emergency period and revived in 2010 under Prime Minister Manmohan Singh's government. The logic was simple. India wants a receipt. If you are an NGO in India receiving money from a foreign government, foundation, or organization, you register with the FCRA, you disclose what you receive, you channel it through a designated bank account, and you file annual returns. In exchange, you can legally receive that foreign money. The system has been amended multiple times. In 2020, the Modi government tightened the rules. No more sub-granting, where one FCRA registered NGO passes money to an unregistered one, administrative expenses capped at 20% of foreign funds, down from 50%, and mandatory Aadhaar verification for everyone involved in running an FCRA-registered organization. Each amendment, the same Western criticism followed. Each time India proceeded anyway. The numbers justify the concern. 23,000 crore rupees is not a small amount. It is not incidental. It is a structured, sustained, organized flow of money from specific foreign sources into specific Indian organizations over many years. The question of what that money does inside India, whether it builds hospitals, runs schools, funds political advocacy, facilitates religious conversion, or destabilizes specific communities, is not an unreasonable question for a sovereign government to ask about money entering its own territory. America understood this concern well enough to build FARA, its own law regulating exactly this, decades ago. But when India applies the same logic to its own territory, America declares it an attack on religious freedom. The double standard deserves examination. Here is what India is actually proposing. The Foreign Contribution Regulation Amendment Bill 2026 was introduced in the Lok Sabha on March 25, 2026. Its stated purpose, in the words of Minister Nityanand Rai, to make the use of foreign contributions more transparent and accountable, and to ensure that no institution acting against the sovereignty and integrity of India can operate behind the cover of foreign funding. 3 changes in the bill are doing most of the work. The first is the designated authority. Under the current FCRA, when an NGO loses its registration, whether because the government canceled it for violations, the organization surrendered it, or it simply was not renewed, the organization is supposed to stop receiving and using foreign funds. But there is a gap in enforcement. The assets that organization has already accumulated using foreign funds, the buildings, land, bank balances, vehicles, and equipment acquired over years of foreign-funded operation, can continue to sit with the same people. They can operate informally, rename themselves, or simply continue using the assets while technically not having a valid license. The new designated authority would close this gap. When an organization loses its FCRA registration, the designated authority can step in to manage and, if necessary, dispose of the assets that were built using foreign contributions. This is the provision that triggered the loudest alarm in Washington. The second change is personal accountability. Currently, if an NGO violates FCRA regulations, the action is taken against the organization. The individuals running it, the president, trustees, directors, managing committee members, can theoretically walk away, shut down the NGO, and open a new one the next week. The 2026 amendment extends accountability to the individuals. The chief functionary of an FCRA-registered organization, now defined to include not just the president, but also trustees, directors, partners, and management controllers, can be personally held responsible for violations. Closing and reopening becomes significantly harder when the individuals themselves face consequences. The third change is state-specific reporting. Currently, an FCRA-registered organization files an annual return showing total foreign funds received and total expenditure. The 2026 amendment adds a requirement to report which state the money was spent in and for what purpose. This sounds administrative. It is actually significant. India has border districts where demographic patterns and religious compositions have shifted in ways that intelligence assessments attribute partly to organized foreign-funded activity. State-level reporting creates a data trail that makes it possible to cross-reference foreign funding flows against specific geographic and demographic changes. Together, these 3 changes represent a meaningful upgrade in India's ability to know what foreign money is doing inside its own country. None of them ban foreign funding. None of them require every NGO to shut down. They require accountability, transparency, and personal responsibility from the people managing foreign money in India. The fact that this has generated a diplomatic intervention from the United States says something about whose interests are being protected. Why America is panicking. America reacted to the FCRA Amendment bill quickly and in a highly coordinated way. Politicians from both major parties opposed it, which was unusual because Democrats and Republicans rarely agree on much in 2026. On May 22, 2026, Congressman Chris Smith published a detailed opinion piece criticizing the FCRA amendment. Smith is the chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Subcommittee on Global Health, Global Human Rights, and International Organizations. He has a long history of taking positions critical of India's human rights record under Prime Minister Modi. In his May 22nd piece, he claimed the bill would do lasting damage to U.S.-India relations and specifically focused on the asset seizure provisions, which he characterized as a mechanism to take over Christian churches, charities, hospitals, and schools. Before Secretary of State Marco Rubio's official visit to India in May 2026, Smith reportedly briefed Rubio and urged him to raise the FCRA issue directly with Indian counterparts and push for the amendment to be withdrawn. This is an extraordinary intervention, an American congressman asking the U.S. Secretary of State to use diplomatic leverage during a bilateral visit to change domestic Indian legislation. Senator James Risch, chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, separately raised concerns. The U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, USCIRF, simultaneously pushed to place India on its list of countries of particular concern, a designation that carries potential implications for U.S. foreign policy toward India. American Christian lobby groups organized letter-writing campaigns and congressional briefings. The combined pressure represents something that has no equivalent in any previous dispute between the United States and India over domestic policy. When India enacted the National Register of Citizens in Assam, the American response was measured. When India amended the Citizenship Act, the criticism was significant but did not involve the Secretary of State being personally lobbied to intervene in bilateral meetings. The FCRA response suggests that the specific mechanism through which American money reaches Indian organizations is being treated as a vital American interest. The reason is not hard to find. A significant portion of the foreign funding flowing into FCRA-registered organizations in India comes from foundations, religious organizations, advocacy groups, and what Indian intelligence assessments have described as political influence networks. When India says it wants to know exactly where that money goes and hold specific people personally accountable for how it is used, the Americans who are sending that money have reason to be concerned. The FARA hypocrisy. The most important fact in this entire debate is one that no American politician raising objections to India's FCRA Amendment wants to discuss in the same breath. The United States has its own version of this law, and it is significantly stricter than anything India has ever proposed. The Foreign Agents Registration Act, FARA, has been in place in the United States since 1938. It requires any person who acts as an agent of a foreign principal in a political or quasi-political capacity to register with the U.S. Department of Justice, disclose the nature and scope of that activity, report all money received from and paid to the foreign principal, and file periodic updates. The law covers lobbying, public relations, political advocacy, fund distribution, essentially any activity intended to influence American public opinion, policy, or government officials on behalf of a foreign interest. The penalties for FARA violations include criminal prosecution, jail time, civil penalties, mandatory record inspections. An individual convicted under FARA can face up to 5 years in prison and significant financial penalties. The United States does not describe FARA as an attack on civil society or a threat to religious freedom. It describes it as a fundamental element of protecting American sovereignty from foreign interference, and the Trump administration has enforced it with particular vigor. In recent years, the Justice Department has brought FARA-related actions involving individuals across multiple industries, political affiliations, and nationalities. The same administration whose Secretary of State was being asked to intervene with India over its foreign funding regulation law has simultaneously been using its own foreign funding regulation law as an active enforcement tool. The parallel that the FCRA Amendment most closely resembles is not some extreme authoritarian crackdown. It is FARA. Both laws require organizations receiving foreign money to register, disclose, and be accountable. Both laws create consequences for violations. The primary difference is that FARA in America covers a broader range of activities and carries criminal penalties that the FCRA in its proposed form does not. If FARA is a legitimate, necessary tool for protecting American sovereignty, which every American politician across both parties agrees it is, then FCRA is the same tool applied by a sovereign Indian state to its own territory. The question that nobody in Washington wants to answer is a simple one. Why is it acceptable for the United States to require disclosure and accountability from foreign-funded organizations operating in America, but unacceptable for India to require the same from foreign-funded organizations operating in India? The sovereignty argument. The debate about FCRA is not at its core a debate about whether charities should be allowed to operate in India. India has never prevented charities from operating. The FCRA has never required charitable activity to stop. It requires disclosure and accountability from organizations that receive foreign funding. The debate is about whether a sovereign democratic government has the right to know what foreign money is doing inside its own country, and to take action when it determines that foreign money is being used in ways that threaten national security, sovereignty, or social stability. India's answer to that question has been consistently yes, and the legal framework it has built reflects the same reasoning that every major democracy in the world has applied to the same question. The United Kingdom has its own foreign funding regulation framework under the Charities Act. Australia has foreign interference laws that are among the strictest in any democratic country. Canada has the Lobbying Act with strict disclosure requirements for foreign-funded activities. Germany has laws regulating foreign political foundations. All of these countries have decided that their government should know what foreign money is doing inside their borders. India's specific concern is not abstract. Indian intelligence assessments have documented, over many years, the use of foreign-funded NGOs as vectors for activities that go beyond charity. Organized religious conversion programs funded by foreign evangelical networks. Foreign-funded advocacy in border states with separatist movements. Foreign money flowing into political protest infrastructure, and, most recently, cross-border financial networks using overseas-issued debit cards and digital transactions in ways designed to obscure the money trail. When Congressman Smith frames the FCRA Amendment as an attack on Christian churches and charities, he is describing one category of FCRA-registered organizations, but he is not describing the reason the amendment was drafted. The amendment was drafted because of documented instances of foreign money being used in ways that India's security establishment views as threats, and because the existing legal framework had gaps that allowed organizations whose licenses were canceled to continue operating through their accumulated assets. There is also a historical argument that deserves to be made directly. India's experience with foreign interference through institutional funding is not theoretical. It is documented across its own colonial history. The same mechanism, foreign money given to Indian institutions conditional on those institutions taking positions aligned with foreign interests, was used systematically by the British colonial government to shape Indian political and social dynamics. The lesson India drew from that history is that the question of who funds what inside India is a question of sovereignty, not charity. Why India is right to hold this line? The basic principle is simple. India has the right to control foreign money entering its own territory. It has the right to ask where that money goes, how it is used, who is responsible for it, and whether organizations are continuing to operate after losing their licenses. That principle will not change because American politicians wrote opinion pieces against it. India has been tightening the FCRA framework for years. It strengthened the law in 2016, again in 2018, and once more in 2020. Every change brought international criticism. India still moved forward because it believed the rules were necessary. This is not a one-time reaction. It is a clear and consistent policy. India also sees the wider political context. The same U.S. Religious Freedom Commission has repeatedly pushed for India to be placed on a special watch list. India has rejected those reports, saying they are politically influenced and do not fairly reflect the country's internal situation. When American politicians, commissions, and Senate bodies all raise the same issue at the same time, New Delhi does not see it as simple concern. It sees a coordinated attempt to protect American influence inside India's civil society. India's response is likely to remain the same. Listen to the criticism, examine it, and then set it aside if it conflicts with India's own national interest. Around 23,000 crore rupees enters India every year from foreign sources. India wants to know where every rupee goes, who controls it, and what purpose it serves. That is not an unreasonable demand. It is a basic right of a sovereign country. And the strongest argument in India's favor is simple. The United States created its own foreign agent law, FARA, in 1938 for the same reason, to track foreign influence inside its borders. America is not unhappy about India's FCRA bill because it threatens religious freedom. America is unhappy because India is getting serious about knowing what American money is doing inside India. Those are two different things, and only one of them is the real story. If this gave you something to think about, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Like, subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one.